Today's daf is daf Lamed Vav, and we begin with the last line on Lamed Hamid Beis, where we left off yesterday. Hahu lemishrei domon dipsule mukdoshim b'hanohu diasa. So that the Gemara goes according to Reb Shimon now. Reb Shimon, if you recall, was the one who held that the dam of shchita is not a machshir l'kabel tumah. And the Gemara says that although the pasuk says ala aretz tishbachenu kamayim, and that would seem to indicate that the blood of the shchita has the same status as mayim, because that pasuk is specifically referring to dam shchita, and mayim is a machshir l'kabel tumah. So too, by virtue of this analogy, dam of shchita should also be a machshir. And the Gemara says, no, Reb Shimon is not going to use that pasuk to teach me that dam shchita is a machshir, because I need that pasuk to be matir psulei hamukdoshim liachar pidyon. Meaning, if you have a carbon and it became pasul, let's say it became a balmum, and the halacha is that you could be poda it, but even after you poda it onto mos, the original carbon still retains a residue of its status as hegdish, which generates two isurim, giza and avoda, which means you can't shear the shearings off and you can't work with it. And the Gemara derives that from psukim and so forth. So therefore, I need a pasuk to tell me that hana is mutter, the mishrei dama, that the dam itself, I might have equated dam with giza and let's say cholav, for example, is also, and I would have extended these so I know to include dam. Kamash malon, our oretz tivshachenu kamayim, it's like water that you spill it out, meaning it has no status of kiddush, and therefore it's mutter even by no. Salket, I would have thought whole the isur v'asir v'giza v'avoda, since the Torah says that there's still a residue of hegdesh even after you apoda a psulei hamukdoshim, and that expresses itself in two isurim, in isur giza, which means to shear the wool off, or in an isur avoda, is therefore dama and leboy kvura. I'm not allowed to have any benefit from the dam as well, and I would have to bury the dam so that nobody gets any illegal benefit from it. Kamash malon, the Torah therefore says al aretz tishbachenu kamayim, to teach you that psulei hamukdoshim are also bid giza v'avod, but not the dam. Now we're going back to the question of dam chalolim. Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel, we have a brisa, v'dam chalolim yishteh. Now let's notice that we're talking about dam chalolim. Dam chalolim is an indication that the animal died with the Yitzias Adam. And prat ledam kiluach she'eno machshir hazroim. So that although, as we said yesterday, if you kill the animal and the blood comes out, that blood is a machshir, and if it falls on vegetables, then those vegetables are susceptible to kabbalas tumah, but not in the case of dam kiluach. And Rashi explains that when the blood comes out, then there are three different stages of the blood. The first blood that comes out of the animal is called dripping blood. It's just drops come out, very few drops. The second stage is that the blood starts spurting out. And then there's a third stage. Why is there a third stage? Because initially when the blood starts splurting out, it's very red in color. And then it becomes black in color. It's that black dam, that's the third dam to come out of the animal, which signals the death of the animal. That's called dam chalolim. So it's only the darker blood after, number one, the initial drops, and number two, the initial spurt. That dam, which is dark dam, that is classified as a mashke, And that's why it says yishte, which means it's a mashke, and it's a mashke, meaning it's one of the zayin mashkim, and if it falls on a vegetable, it's machshir the vegetable to be mekabel too. Tana Rabbana, we learned in a brayso, ashochet vehitis dam al hadlas. Okay, now we get into a more complicated sugya, a little bit more lumbus. And we're talking about a case where a person shechts an animal, and the blood from the shechita spurts at a distance and lands on a gourd, a dalas. Now, let's just, by way of introduction, point out that whether or not that dam is machshir the gourd to mekabel tumah will depend upon a couple of different factors. Number one, we have to emphasize that the gourd has been detached because there's no kabbalas tumah on that which is still growing in the ground. Okay, so the gourd was detached. Now we have to know whether dam shechita is machshir. And we said, according to one opinion in Reb Shimon, that dam shechita is not machshir. So therefore, according to Reb Shimon, there's no question about it. If a sheretz falls on this vegetable, the vegetable remains tahar. However, we'll soon see that Rebbe rejects Reb Shimon, and Rebbe's of the opinion that dam shechita is a machshir. And therefore, the Brisa records the shita Rebbe Omer Huchsha, which means that now this dalas is muchshel kabel tumah if a sheretz falls and it becomes tumah. But now we get to a more complicated sugya, and that's called Reb Chia Omer Tolim. Now, what does tolim mean? Normally, the word tolim means it's a suffix. We don't know if it's tameh or not. Now, why the use of the etymological word tolin? Tolin means to hang it. And the answer is that tolim, with regard to truma, okay, let's just set the basic aleph beis of truma. If truma becomes tameh, then number one, you're not allowed to eat it, and number two, you have to burn it. Truma tmei nisrefes. There's a whole sugya in Masechta Beitza about whether or not on Yontif you're allowed to light the fire and then put your pot on top of the fire and cook your pot. Anyway, so now what's tolin? If we would say that this vegetable or whatever it might be, this grain is not tameh, then it's truma and there's a mitzvah to eat it. If, on the other hand, we know for certain that it's tameh, then we have to burn it. In between is a suffix where we don't know whether or not it is tameh or not tameh. If it's not tameh, then you have to eat it. But it might be tameh, therefore you're not allowed to eat it, and you have to burn it. But you can't burn it because it might not be tameh. So that's called tolin. Tolin means lo ochlim velo sarfin. It's like hanging between heaven and earth. We don't eat it because we're afraid it's tameh, and you're not allowed to eat truma tmeya. On the other hand, we don't burn it because even though you have to burn truma tmeya, we're not sure that this is tameh. And Rabbi Chia basically says that if the dam spurts from the animal that you shechted onto a gourd, and then a sheretz falls on, we don't know if that truma, if let's say the gourd is truma, whether it's tameh and you have to burn it, or it's not tameh because the dam is not machshir, and therefore you have to eat it. So therefore, tolin right in the middle. Okay, now we're going to have a statement of Rabbi Oshia, who comments on this brisa. Now, honestly, I have a little bit of an ignorance here. I don't know if Rabbi Oshia is a Tana or an Amora, but I'm pretty sure that he's a Tana. In any event, what comment does he make? He wants to give us what we call normative halacha in the fancy jargon of today, which means halacha l'maisa. How do we paskin here? Says Rabbi Yoshia, me'acha sheRebbe Omer Huchshav, Rabbi Chia Omer Tolin. Ono al mi nismo. Who do we paskin like? We have machlokas between one Tana, that's Rebbe, who says we have to eat it because it's truma tahora. I'm sorry. Rebbe holds machshir. No, sorry. Rebbe holds we have to burn it. And then we have Rabbi Osha who's not sure about it, and he thinks maybe we don't burn it because maybe it's not tummy, because maybe dam of the shechita is not machshir. So we got one against one. Al minismoch, who do we rely on? Bo v'nismoch al divrei Rabbi Shimon. Shai Rabbi Shimon omer shechita machsheres v'lo dam. Meaning that we could be machria, we could tip the scale and make it 2 against 1. Meaning, on the side of Reb Chia, we have Rabbi Shimon, because Reb Shimon holds that the dam of shechita is not a machshir. Keep in mind that Reb Chia holds that dam hashchita is machshir. He has a different suffix here, and that's why he comes to Tolin. But one thing is clear, that Reb Shimon and Reb Chia both agree, that's the lowest common denominator between them, that you cannot eat this truma. Why? Because according to Reb Chia, we have a suffix, maybe it wasn't muchshar, but we have a suffix, maybe it was muchshar. Now, Reb Chia is not going to allow you to burn it. Rebbe says you got to burn it because it's definitely tameh, because the dam shechita is definitely machshir. Reb Chia is not going to allow you to burn it because he's not sure that it's machshir. Reb Shimon, b'toras vadai, without any suffix at all, is going to say that you're not allowed to burn it because it did not receive tumah, it wasn't contaminated by the shetz because it wasn't muchshar, because Reb Shimon holds that dam of the shechita is, which now spurted onto this gourd, is not a machshir. Okay, so far we have Reb Oshu. Now we're going to have 2 interpretations of Reb Oshu. The first is going to be Rav Papa, and the second will be Rav Ashi. Omar Rav Papa. Okay, now, it's fascinating because shechita of 2 simonim, from the time he finishes the first simon until he finishes the second simon, I don't know, I think it's like 5 seconds. I don't even know if it's 5 seconds. Now, the dam of the shechita from the first simon, we'll call it minus 5 seconds, spurted onto the gourd. But 5 seconds later, when he shechted the second simon, we don't know if there's still dam on the gourd. If we would know for sure that there's dam on the gourd, given the fact that Rabbi Chia disagrees and rejects Reb Shimon and holds that dam shechita is a machshir, then at the point in which he finishes shechting the second simon, if the gourd is still bloody, if you pardon the expression, then that blood is dam shechita, which according to Rabbi Chia is machshir. So therefore, Reb Chia and Rebbe will agree in the following scenario: Hakol modim, heicha de'isol adam mitchila ve'ad sof. If by the time he gets to the second simon and he completes his shechita, the gourd is still bloody, then kuliyama lo pligi, both Rebbe and Reb Chia, who hold that dam shechita is machshir, lo pligi de machshir. So where then, asks Rav Papa, is the stea krav, is the battlefield? Wherein lies the controversy between Reb Chia and Rebbe? Ki pligi b'niskaneach adam bein simon l'simon. Now, don't ask me how you managed this, but somehow they wiped off the dam between the shechita, the first simon, and the second simon, which is 5 seconds later. But again, maybe I'm making a mistake here when I assume it's 5 seconds later, because we said that there's a psul of shechita called shehiyah, but I think we said that the psul of shehiyah might depend upon how long it would take him to bring an animal and lay it down and shecht it and so forth and so on. So it might be a little bit longer of a time period. In any event, somebody came along and wiped off the dam before the shechita was completed with the second simon. And now the Gemara says, do we consider this dam shechita? Why? Because it was only dam at the time of the first simon. The clincher of the shechita is the second simon. And by the time he got to the second simon, they had already wiped off the dam. So if dam shechita is the machshir here, then since there was no dam at the time of the completion of the shechita, the gourd was bloodless, then at that point there's no dam to be machshir because we need dam shechita machshir according to both Rabbi Chia and Rebbe. But Rebbe holds yeshna l'shechita mitchila vad sof. The shechita begins from the beginning. And the status of the dam that spurts out after the first simon, according to Rebbe, is dam shechita. And that dam shechita is machshir. Now, I believe, and, I'm sticking my neck out over here, that even according to Rebbe, we have to make sure that he does eventually shecht properly the second simon. You can't you can't classify and define the dam as dam shechita if he doesn't finish up the shechita. But it doesn't matter as far as wiping off the dam is concerned, because Rebbe holds that yeshna l'shechita mitchila itself, already at the beginning of the shechita it has shem shechita, and therefore the dam that spurted out from the first simon is dam shechita, and dam shechita is a machshir. Reb Chia, on the other hand, savar eno l'shchita el basof. We had this machlokas, the old machlokas. So if eno l'shchita el basof, so the shem shchita is chal when he finishes the second semen and he completes the shchita. At that point, there's no dam on the gourd. There was dam at the beginning. That's not dam shchita. That's called dam maka, meaning the dam that came out from the first simon, if you hold ein l'shchita el basof, that dam doesn't have the status of dam shchita. It has the status of dam mak. It's like a wounded animal that was wounded by shechting his first simon, and that's the dam of a mak, which is not a machshir. Okay, now, according to this presentation that we have from Rav Papa, what did Reb Chia mean by Tolin? Umay Tolin. Tolin adover ad gmar shchit. Wow, this is Reb Chia, according to Rav Papa. Rav Papa says that let's wait until the story is over. Did we wipe off the dam before the second simon, or do we not? If the dam remained on the gourd at the time of the second simon when he completed his shchita, then the dam now becomes dam machshir. It's dam shchita, even though the dam spurted out onto the gourd at the time of the first simon, which made it dam maka, but now there's still dam on the gourd, and somehow we can be mitzaref and integrate the dam from the first simon together with the fact that that dam is still present in existence on the gourd at the time that he completes the shechita. V'lo, but if, as history unfolds itself, it turns out that he wiped off the dam before he got to the second simon, is lo machsh. Why? Because ein l'shchita el basof, and the sofa shchita there was no dam. So basically, according to Rav Papa, the word tolin doesn't really have any significance. It really is just a technicality. It's a logistics. It's wait until we see what happens. But there really is no suffix here. I mean, we might have a suffix because we don't know what's going to happen. But as far as the halach is concerned, it's a clear call. If the dam is there and remains on the gourd at the end, then it's machshir. It's dam shchita because yesh shchita baso. But if on the other hand he clears it off, then it's not a machshir. But we just don't know, and we call it tolin until we're waiting to see the outcome. Umay bo v'nismach al Rabbi Shimon. Now it's a little problematic here. What's this nismach al divrei Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Chia are on two sides of the battlefield here, because Reb Shimon holds that dam shchita is not a machshir. Rabbi Chia holds that dam shchita is a machshir. So what are you telling me that Reb Shimon is now? And the answer is Rabbi Chia. Right. So the question is Reb Shimon lo machshir, Reb Shimon machshir. Dam shchita is, and the answer is b'niskaneach miu ashvei ladodi. If an event that somebody wiped off the dam from this gourd by the time the shochet got to Shech the second Simon, then we have an absolute equation between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Chia, and they both hold, for two different reasons, that this gourd is not muksha l'kabel tumah. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's not muksha because dam shchita is not machshir. And even if I were to hold that yesh l'shchita b'tchila vad sof, it would make a difference. According to Rabbi Chia, ein l'shchita el v'sof. And therefore, since it was wiped off by the time he got to the second Simon, then that dam is only dam makkah. And both, therefore, at the bottom line, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon agree that the gourd is not muksha because he wiped off the dam before the end of the shkita. Marlo machshir. Both of them will say, at the end of the day, pardon the expression, TOT, Tuchas Afetish, that it's not machshir. It's therefore obviously Rebbe Chad, the Ein Dvar Shalecha Bokum Shnaim. So we have Rebbe against the other two, because Rebbe is going to paskin on this gourd, even though it was wiped off before the second Simon, it's mukhshar, and Rebbe Chia and Reb Shimon will both agree that it's not mukhshar. Ad Kan Rav Papa. Now we get to Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi Omar, Tolim Liolam Machshir. What it means is that, not that Tolim, as Rav Papa would interpret it, means let's wait a while and see what happens with the dam on the gourd. But no, Liolam. Tolim means it remains Tolui, and in a suffix situation, Liolam, forever and ever. Why? Niskanech l'Rabbi Chia sefukim safkele yesh no shchita l'sof and l'shchita l'v'sof. Umay Tolim lo ochlin v'lo sarfin. So now we go back to the classic understanding or interpretation of the word Tolim, and Tolim means a suffix. We really don't know whether it's mukshar or not mukshar. Therefore, and why? Because we don't know if yesh no l'shchita mitchila l'sof, yesh l'shchita l'v'sof. So the fact that you wiped off the gourd from its blood and it's no longer bloody at the time of the second shchita, the second simon, is irrelevant, because if I hold yesh no l'shchita mitchila l'sof as Rebbe holds, and Reb Chia on one side holds it, maybe. Therefore, the dam at the time of the first simon that spurted out of that itself is machshir, the gourd, the kabel tumah. And the bottom line is lo ochlin v'lo sarf, meaning we can't burn it, because if I hold that ein l'shchita ela basof, then it's not machshir, but we cannot burn it, and so therefore we can't eat it because. I'm sorry. Let's go over this one. I just want to make sure I said it right. Again, we're going to try to explain why, according to Reb Chia, you can't eat it and you can't burn. If you hold that ein l'shchita el basof against Rebbe, then Reb Chia, if he was sure of that, he would say that you have to eat it. It's truma tahora. If, on the other hand, I hold yesh no l'shchita mitchila vad sof, and Reb Chia doesn't know, maybe that's the truth, and therefore I accept Rebbe Shita, and therefore the first spurt of dam, dark dam, that hit the gourd, that's enough to be considered dam shchita. Dam shchita is a machshir. If that be the case, I have to burn the truba. But I don't know, so therefore told it. That's the suffer. Yeah, but how does that work out with Rabbi Shimon? And we're going to get 2 against 1. So that's Gemara's next kash. Umay bo v'nisach al div Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon lo machshir Reb Chia sfeika. You can't equate Reb Shimon, who's standing on the sidelines here, with Reb Chia. Reb Chia holds it's a suffix. And fundamentally, Reb Chia would hold that if Yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof, then dam shchita is a machshir. Reb Chia is not sure if in this particular case it would be machshir, because there might be room to say ein l'shchita l'baso. So Gemara answers, there is a lowest common denominator, linyan sreifa miu shavi ladodi, that what? No one between Reb Chia and Reb Shimon would allow you to burn it. Mar lo sarfe, umar lo sarfe. And why? According to Reb Chia, we can't burn it because maybe we would hold yesh no l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof. I'm sorry, because ein l'shchita el basof, and therefore it wasn't machshir because it was wiped off before you got to sof shchita. According to Reb Shimon, we can't burn it because it's mamish b'torah's vadai truma tahora, because dam shchita is not a machshir. Havile Rebbe Chad v'ein dvar shalech b'makom shnam. Okay, now continuing with Rav Ashi's line of reasoning, Hachikom. This is what Rav Chia was saying. Kigon zos, tolin lo ochel l'sof. This last line, by the way, is a total repetition. I think you have to take it out. Anyway, boy, Rav Shim ben Lakish. Okay, now we have a suffix of Shim ben Lakish, and this is somehow going to connect to Rav Shimon's Shita, as we'll soon see. Tsarid shel menachos monim bo rishon v'sheni o ein monim bo rishon l'sheni. Now let's understand. And now I'm going to present the Doraisa halacha. Since menachos are made of both soles and shemen. Shemen is one of the 7 machshirim, and therefore the mincha, by virtue of the fact that it's mixed in shemen, is mukshar lekabel tumah, and therefore if a sheretz would fall on the mincha, then we'd have to get rid of this mincha. It became tum. However, here we're talking about something that's called tsarid. Tsarid means that he didn't mix the oil properly, and parts of the flour are untouched by the oil. If a sheretz falls on that, we'll call it a lump, then pashut pshat, intuitively we would say it's not makabel tumah because there's no shemen on that lump. However, we have something called chibas kodesh. Now, I have to admit my limitation. I always thought that chibas kodesh was the rabbanon, but this sugya seems to assume that chibas kodesh is dorais. Now, let's understand what happens. Monim bo rishon v'sheni. If this lump from the mincha becomes a rishon or a sheni, then on that side in Reish Lakish's Safek, it will transmit Tumah to a Shlishi, and for that matter, even to a Revi, because in Kodshim there's even a Revi, if you remember. O ein monin bo rishon v'sheni. Or shall we say that no, this is only Chibas Kodesh. Technically, according to the strict law of the Torah, this is not Tomei, because there was no shemen mixed in at that point in the solus and the lump. So it's not mukshal l'kabel tumah. So I don't care how many shrotzim you put on top of this lump, it's still tar. And obviously if it's tar, it cannot transmit contamination to anything else. So now the Gemara analyzes the 2 stud of Reish Lakish. Ki mahanya chibas kodesh afsule. Although there's halacha of Chibas Kodesh which says that the laws of Kodshim, as far as Tumah V'Tara, are more strict than Chullin, and therefore we're going to be strict and say that even though there's no shemen and there was no any of the 7 mashkim to be machshir, nevertheless we're going to say Chibas Kodesh is, but that's only as far as the goof is concerned, meaning that lump where the sheretz fell down on, that is tummy. But we're not going to give it a full status of tumah such that it could transmit tumah to others. Lemimne bei rishon v'sheni lo odim lo shna. Or should we say no? You know what? We are not going to downgrade chibas kodesh to a secondary stage, secondary level, but rather we're going to consider it as if it was full kodesh, and the law of kodesh is that the lump is makabel tumah even without the hechsher of the shemen, and therefore, in that sense, if we're equating chibas kodesh 100% with kodesh, then it could pass on the tumah to a shlishi and a revi. Rabbi Eliezer, Toshma, I would like to present my answer to Rav Shimon ben Lakish's question, based on a drasha. Now, this drasha is going to occupy our minds for a while. The pasuk says, "Mikola ochel shoye ochel." Now, there are two psukim here, and we don't have time to go through them, but one of the two psukim is repetitive, and therefore it's superfluous for a drasha. And that's Mikol Ochel Asher Ye Ochel, and the Torah says it became Tameh. Ochel Abba B'mayim Huchshar, Ochel She'eno Ba B'mayim Lo Huchshar. The truth is, we really should, if we want to do a decent job, we should go through the psukim. What time is it? I just have to see how we're doing on the clock. So again, I'll give you a homework assignment. On your spare time, you'll go through the psukim inside. We can't do it now. And therefore, what we're saying is that from the fact that Rabbi Elazar quoted this brisa as a support for one side in Reish Lakish's vacillating suffix, it means that ochel ba b'mayim hukshar lo ba b'mayim eno machsh, which means that we don't treat chibas hakodesh, upgrading as it was to the status of kodesh, and it cannot pass on its tumah status because the tumah is limited to gufe because there was no mayim or no shemen mixed into this lump. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Atu Reb Shimon ben Lakish lesle ochel haba b'mayim? Are you telling me, Rabbi Elazar, that Reish Lakish holds that if the food didn't come in contact with water, then it's not susceptible to passing on the tumah? That's not so. Because Reb Shimon ben Lakish, at the end of the day, vacillated back and forth. He wasn't sure about it. And you, Rabbi Elazar, are quoting a pasuk as if to say that the law is definitely that you need ba b'mayim. And Reb Shimon ben Lakish, kami boile, he vacillates back and forth. Chibas kodesh ochel haba b'mayim dami, meaning we upgraded complete the status of kodshim, even though it's not really kodshim, it's only chibas kodesh. But nevertheless, it's like kodshim, and therefore you don't need any of the machshirim. Oh, look. Reish Lakish didn't know. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar nami mi turei kroi kamar. He had a redundant verse, and that's what he derived from. Why? Because michtek siv v'chiyitain mayim al zora is mikol ha'ochel asher yochel lamali. Right, again, if you go through the psukim inside, we're talking about Vayikra Perek Aleph, you'll see that there's a redundancy here because it says kiyitain mayim al zora, and then it says mikol ha'ochel asher yochel, which means any food that's edible. Well, what's that coming to teach us? And that's what Rabbi Elazar is going to darshan here as a mute on Amud Beis. So let's just end Amud Aleph.